Hey guys, and welcome back to Z3 Cubing. Today I'm going to upgrade my LEGO Cube collection by making a 4x4. So around 7 years ago now, near the start of my channel, I made this puzzle right here, the LEGO Cube. Basically, it's just a normal 3x3 Rubik's Cube, but instead of colored stickers, we instead have colored Legos glued onto the outside. Now, if I were you, I would not go watch the original video that I made about making this because it's really old and terrible, but I would go watch the video made a few years earlier by RedKB. I think he was the first one to do this, and he was definitely the one who inspired me to make mine back in the day. But in that video, he also showed another type of LEGO Cube that he had made other than just a 3x3. That's right, he made a 4x4 LEGO Cube, and ever since then, I have just really wanted to make one too. So, today's the day. Today, we're finally going to complete my 7-year dream to expand my LEGO Cube collection up from the 3x3 and into the world of the 4x4. And the great thing too, is I can finally show you guys the process of making one of these things in a video that's not completely old and terrible. So let's get started. To make a LEGO Cube, you're going to need two basic things. For one, a Rubik's Cube to glue the Legos onto, and for two, some Legos to glue onto the Rubik's Cube. And I guess some glue as well. Now the Legos are easy enough to obtain. If you go onto the Lego website, they have a service called Pick a Brick, and they let you just pick out all the different bricks that you want, and they'll send them to you. It's really easy, it's not too crazy expensive, but the shipping does take a long time. Of course, you're going to need 6 different colors of these 2x2 plates: white, yellow, green, blue, and red, orange. And for a 3x3, you're going to need 9 of each of them. For a 4x4, you're going to need 16. It's also nice to have 1 or 2 extra of each one. The glue is also pretty straightforward. Pretty much any liquid super glue like this will work. The harder part is just not getting it all over your hands and the table and the pieces of the cube as you're gluing the Legos on, which, as you might be able to see, I did a pretty bad job of last time. There's super glue everywhere, and I also ruined the other half of this table. I can still feel the drops of super glue on it to this day. Now you may have noticed that there is still one major detail that I had been avoiding up to this point, and that is the actual cube that we're going to be using to make this 4x4 LEGO Cube. And that's because finding the right cube to make one of these is actually one of the hardest parts, because the size of each piece has to perfectly match the size of each Lego. You may have noticed that a standard size 3x3 is a lot bigger than 3 Legos lined up like this. Now if you did just use a normal size 3x3, it would turn out looking something like this. Now this is actually a mass-produced LEGO Cube that I made a video about recently that actually comes with all of these admittedly fake Legos. So if this one looks alright to you, personally I don't think it looks bad, just a lot different, then just go ahead and pay $8 and don't bother making one yourself. But a lot of people still prefer the look without the black lines, plus there is one more big advantage, and that is called bandaging. Basically, when you have the Legos right up next to each other like this, that allows you to take some 2x4 plates like this and stick them on top of the pieces to effectively bandage these two pieces together. Now we cannot turn this side at all. This just adds a whole new challenge to the cube, plus you can add however many more of them and customize it in any of hundreds of different ways. Now if you are looking to make a 3x3 version, there's only one cube I know of that's actually the right size to perfectly fit 3 Legos, and that is the QJ Mini 3x3. There's also only one website that I know of that sells it. I'll link that in the description down below, but it's a really old cube, so don't expect it to turn well. It's basically just a Rubiks brand on the inside. Now I'm not looking for another 48mm 3x3, no, I'm looking for a 64mm 4x4. Now when it comes to the 4x4, you actually start to have the opposite problem. The cube is actually too small for the 4 Legos. Now this is my main 4x4, which is 60mm, which is clearly way too small, but fortunately it is kind of like a mini version. A standard size 4x4 is actually 62mm, but that's also a tiny bit too small. So to the rescue, we have the Rubiks brand. Yes, the original Rubiks 4x4. This is around 64 or 65mm. Being a millimeter too big isn't as big of a deal as being too small. Now the only problem with this cube, other than turning absolutely terrible, is that it was my first 4x4. I got it 10 years ago now. That's over half of my life. It has these CubeSmith tiles on it that you can no longer buy, and there's just no way that I'm making a mod out of this thing. So, because Rubiks doesn't sell these anymore, they actually have a new version that I'm not sure is the right size, and even if it were, it has these weird plastic built-in tiles that would be kind of weird to glue Legos to. Instead, it was eBay to the rescue, and I bought another original Rubiks 4x4. This one, because I haven't taken it apart a million times, actually turns a little bit better than the one that I have. So this cube is also just about 64mm, so our Legos should fit just perfectly on there. So there we go. We got our cube, we got our Legos, we got our glue. There's just one more thing that we need to do before we get started, and that is actually sand down the corners of each of these Legos. As you can see, they're pretty pointy to start with, and we have to get them nice and smooth like this. Otherwise, we'd make our cube even more catchy than it already is. So yeah, the plan is sand down the corners of the Legos, take all the stickers off, glue all the Legos on, and then we'll see the results. So let's start the time lapse. Alright, so here is the finished LEGO 4x4. Now, as you might be able to tell, the cube has gotten a little bit more wobbly than it was before, so let me just explain what happened. So I actually ended up gluing all the Legos onto the cube with the cube completely disassembled. I just found it a little bit easier that way to perfectly line up the Legos with the pieces, as well as a little bit easier to not accidentally glue the pieces of the cube together. Now, upon reassembling the cube partway through to check the progress, I realized that there was a pretty big issue. It turns out that the cube being a little bit too big at 65 millimeters instead of 64 was actually a lot bigger of a problem than I thought. Basically, there would be these huge gaps in between all the pieces, bigger than the ones that you can see right now, and in addition to making it look kind of weird, there was no way that you could bandage some of these pieces just because the gap in between them was so big that you could not fit a brick across. So what I decided to do was actually sacrifice the turning of this puzzle, this is why it's so wobbly now, and actually sand down a lot of the inner surfaces of the pieces to make them so that they would fit together a lot more closely like this. So fortunately, all the pieces can be bandaged now. Even if there looks like there's a gap, it's easy enough to just close it up and then span the brick across there like that. And in my opinion, the cube actually looks a lot better than it did before. Unfortunately though, that extra millimeter or so per side when sanded down across all the pieces on the cube makes things a little bit wobbly. You can open up a gap here or there, it looks kind of weird. And the turning does suffer quite a bit. It now turns just as bad or worse than my original Rubik's 4x4, just not for the same reason, so you do have to be very careful with it. The pieces kind of pop out like this quite a bit. Now I actually went ahead and rewatched Red KB's video about his LEGO 4x4, and it turns out that he actually used an Ishin 4x4, which is another old brand, but he had the same problem as me with the cube being just a little bit too big. Now he solved the problem a little bit differently. He put the Legos on with the cube assembled, and so basically he just dealt with the fact that the Legos weren't the perfect size. So his cube was perfectly manageable and not super wobbly like mine, but I think the Legos kind of overlapped the pieces a little bit and just made it turn really bad. So he suggested in his video to use the Rubik's 4x4, which must be where I got the idea from. He says that the Rubik's is just a little bit smaller than the Ishin, and so it'll end up working out perfectly, but nope, in my experience, the Rubik's has just the same problem and is still just a little bit too big. For all I know though, that could be a different cube that he was talking about. That was 9 years ago now, and Rubiks might have made their 4x4s bigger since then. Anyway, that's all about that. I hope you guys have been able to appreciate how nice this checker pattern looks in the meantime, and honestly, at this point, I think I care more about how nice this cube looks rather than how good it turns. I'm really not going to solve it that often. But yeah, I think it looks great next to the 3x3 version here. In fact, if you look up close, it actually looks a lot better. The pieces are rounded off a lot nicer, there's a lot less random glue on the pieces, and I actually made sure that the LEGO logos, that's hard to say, are actually all perfectly lined up relative to each other, unlike on the 3x3. The funny thing though, compared to the 3x3, is that since this one was made out of a mini cube, once you add all the Legos on, it pretty much feels like the size of a normal 3x3. Whereas this one just feels massive in your hands. I mean, look at it compared to my main 4x4. It's just humongous. Look at it compared to a 9x9. It's literally the same size. Anyway, I was going to finish off this video by making a cool bandage mod, but I just realized that I didn't buy enough of these 2x4 Legos. So go check out Red KB's video. He does a good job of showing off that feature, and that's pretty much it for this one. I really hope you all enjoyed this video showing the process of making this brand new addition to my collection, even if it is a little bit flawed. Let me know down in the comments what other kind of crazy mods like this you want to see me do in the future. And that's pretty much it. I'll see you guys next time.